Intermittent fasting. What is it? Should I be doing it? Is it really worth it? Today, I'm going to be telling you all, revealing all the details, the ins and outs of intermittent fasting so that you can come away knowing exactly whether it's the right thing for you. My name is Sam Gerlin. I'm the founder of Gerlin Nutrition. I'm an online health and fitness coach and I'm a fully qualified nutritionist. And as I say, today we're going to be talking about a very poignant topic at the moment, which is of course intermittent fasting. I'm always being asked about fasting, whether it's worth it, what are the benefits. You know, people come to me saying how much mental clarity they get as a result. Other people come to me saying, you know, they end up feeling tired and hungry all the time. So, you know, how do we cut the noise and reach a conclusion that's right for you as the individual? Today, we're going to be talking about exactly that. And at this point in the video, I'd also really appreciate it if you could, you know, hit that subscribe button, because if these are the sorts of topics that you're interested in, I'm coming with plenty more value. Drop a comment down below letting me know if these are the sorts of videos that you want to see and if there's anything specific that you want to see after this one. But without any further ado, let's get straight into it today. I've got my trusty laptop here with me, so I cover all the points I'm looking to touch on today. But intermittent fasting, does it work and is it right for you? Okay, so let's kick things off by really cutting through that confusion, as I've already mentioned. You know, I think a lot of the hype and a lot of the confusion comes from social media. It comes from influencers telling you one thing, that you put into practice. It might work for one, it might not work for another. People sharing their personal anecdotes, their little, you know, experiences. I've experienced this myself, to be totally transparent. I've got a lot of good friends who really get the benefit out of, you know, fasting for prolonged periods of time. They get that mental clarity that I mentioned. They get these boosts of energy. And just as a caveat, you know, from the very get-go, to be totally transparent, it's not something that necessarily works for me, but there is a method that I use to really lean into fasting and utilize it as a tool that I'll explain as we go. Okay. Yeah, just off the back of that, you know, people will tell you how life-changing it is, how beneficial it can be. You've got to try it. I can't believe you're not already doing it. But today we're really going to cut through that noise and help you come away with a more, you know, transparent understanding of exactly what it is. Okay, and that begs the question, of course, what exactly is intermittent fasting? I think it's really important to think of, or to not think of intermittent fasting as a diet per se, because I think a lot of people, you know, turn to it as a diet, as a strategy to, as a strategy for their eating, but it's not necessarily the case. It's more of an eating pattern than a diet plan in itself. I hate the word diet. You can sort of see me cringing there as I say it. It's got such a stigma attached to it now. I feel like whenever I say it, people just, you know, draw certain conclusions, but it's more of an eating pattern than a diet plan, a nutrition plan. Okay, there are many sort of different strategies that people adopt. Some people will opt for, you know, a 16 to 8 fasting window, so they won't eat for 16 hours. Then they'll eat all of their food in 8 hours. So that might be, let's say, from the last meal was eaten at 8 o'clock the previous night. They do not eat until midday the following day, for example. Some people are less extreme. They might do a 14 and 10. So same principle applies. You eat in that 10-hour window, you fast for 14 hours. Some people, myself included, we'll get onto that, do a 12-12. Other people are far more extreme. They do like what they call a 5-2, which is they'll eat normally for 5 days. That might be Monday to Friday. And then at the weekends, they'll really restrict themselves. So maybe only eat 500 calories or not eat at all for 24 to 48 hours. And other people will do like alternating days of fasting. So, you know, the first day they'll do normal eating patterns. The next day they won't eat at all. So there's different methods that people use. Some, as I say, are more extreme than others. And, you know, I think it's also important to acknowledge where these ideas come from. Now, there's a lot of, obviously, you know, historical background to this. And, you know, a lot of this is rooted in religion, in cultural influences. A lot of it, you know, people will turn to this idea of it being, you know, a survival, evolutionary sort of mechanism that we should turn to more often. But in today's day and age, a lot of people turn to it just because it makes their life a little bit easier. You know, especially in the mornings, breakfast can be hard to come by. We're all in a rush. We're waking up. We're going to work. We're doing whatever. People just find it easier to skip breakfast or their first meal of the day. Other people just find it, you know, easier to regulate their appetite. And other people use it as a tool to sort of become more aware of their hunger cues. So there are some, you know, pros and cons to this that we'll get into in a bit more detail right now. We'll start with those potential benefits, start on a nice and high note here, because there are certainly benefits to fasting. You know, there are benefits. I've already alluded to the fact that, you know, it's not necessarily something that I do myself, but when I have done it, I do get some of these benefits. So I've got the list here, so I don't miss any. I'll just read them directly from my list here on my trusty little laptop. But the first one is and probably the biggest benefit. This is what I should, you know, caveat all of this with. The biggest benefit in the research evidence, this is, you know, in the studies, the biggest benefit of fasting is calorie control. So there are a few ways that we can restrict calories. The first being reducing, you know, the amount of food that we eat, full stop. The second being eating more satiating, filling foods like protein, like fiber. And the third being just reducing the amount of time that we eat. And fasting falls into that final bucket there, that third bucket. So it's a natural way to control our calories, which is ideal for things like weight loss and fat loss. So that's the biggest benefit, I would suggest, and that's what the research evidence suggests. Excuse me, I've just drunk my coffee, so it's, you know, sort of sitting here in my chest. The second is improved hunger awareness. It can really help us tune into our hunger and satiety cues. It may help with blood sugar regulation as well. So, you know, if you're perhaps pre-diabetic or you're looking to control your blood sugar, spikes and crashes, you get that mid-afternoon crash, then perhaps, you know, going through an experience with intermittent fasting can really help us tune into that. Some people will suggest that it promotes cellular repair and autophagy. We've all heard these sorts of words, you know, banded around, and there's no real concrete evidence that this is the case unless the fast lasts, you know, prolonged periods of times where you really get into that sort of autophagy. Next one is it may reduce inflammation. Now, I do think there is probably some truth to that. You're giving, you know, your gut a little bit of rest to digest the food. So, you know, there is certainly probably, you know, a case for that, because as we know, as I'm always banging on about, a very, very large percentage, I think it's up to 70% of our immune system resides in the gut. So if we look after the gut, it's going to reduce our inflammation, and it will indeed look after us. So if we give our gut a little bit of time to rest and digest, it's going to reduce our inflammation simultaneously. And the final one that I've already mentioned is that, you know, fewer meals or, you know, a restricted time to eat just can make our life a little bit easier. Okay, so they are the potential benefits, the pros of intermittent fasting. Now we'll get on to the drawbacks, or, you know, the cons, some considerations that you should, you know, caveat those positives with. It can cause low energy and brain fog. Some people tell me how much mental clarity they get, but sometimes people experience the complete contrast, which is, you know, low energy and brain fog, especially if they're used to eating, you know, a 12 to 12, or, you know, their eating window was slightly different previously, and they jump straight to a 16 to 8 intermittent fasting window. They can really experience that in the first few days or weeks. I would never ever advise a intermittent fasting plan for, you know, an athlete. It's probably not best for pregnant women either, or, you know, people on specific medications. If you are on medication, it's definitely worth crossing with your GP or, you know, a healthcare professional, or indeed someone like myself, a nutritionist who may be able to advise. But another one is tying off the back of the first point I made from that previous point there. For athletes, it can really disrupt recovery. If we're not taking on the fuel that we need to go again and train again later in the day or the next day, and staying on top of those anabolic windows that are so key to driving that recovery process, then we're never going to fully optimize our performance. So again, that's why it's not ideal for athletes. It may also interfere with, you know, social and family life. Yes, it can simplify things for us on a day-to-day basis, but what do you do when, you know, a meal out with family coincides with your fasting window? You know, it can get a bit awkward there. And, you know, it's a sad fact, but, you know, in some people it can encourage things like binge eating. You know, they restrict themselves so much, thinking that it's benefiting them to the point that when they do eventually eat, they're so hungry and they're so, you know, ravenous that they actually just end up binging and just emotionally eat through lots and lots of food. They overeat, they overconsume, they get those feelings of guilt, and it's just, you know, it coincides with this negative spiral that's just not conducive to a healthy outcome, effectively. And I think what's also, I'll leave that last point till last. Bear with me here. I won't mention that yet. I'll mention this one at the end. So, cutting through the noise. How do you determine if it is right for you? Now, I've got sort of a 4-question protocol that you can ask yourself to make sure that you're coming to the conclusions and finding the right answers for you. The first one being, what are my goals? Very, very simple. On my program, with all my clients, I work with them to establish their goals as one of the primary sort of things that we do. So one of the first things I do with my clients is identify meaningful, purposeful goals. And off the back of that, this helps determine things like whether intermittent fasting are going to be right for you. If your goal is fat loss and you're really struggling to restrict your calories with the amount of food you eat, or by, you know, increasing your protein intake or these other things, then perhaps, you know, reducing your eating window is going to be beneficial for fat loss. There are methods to ensure that we don't experience that brain fog at the same time. We could start with a 12-12 eating window, move it up to a 13-11, 14-10. You can slowly wean your way into a nice 16-8 fasting window. Okay, so ask yourself, what are your goals? If you're an athlete, probably not going to be the best for you, as I've already mentioned. And then you've got to look at your schedule as well. So when we set these goals, I call them SMARTS goals. So SMARTS. That's specific, measurable, achievable. Am I? SMAR, relevant, realistic, time-bound, and systemized. Okay, so it's a slight variation on some more traditional goal-setting frameworks, but that's the one that I use. And a big part of that is relevancy. So making sure that it aligns with your personal values, and your overall schedule and routine. So if it doesn't fit in with your lifestyle, it's just not going to work. So you need to make sure that it's doing exactly that. And then you've got to look at your training. So again, that ties in with your goals. Are you training once a day? Are you training multiple times a day? How can you fit that into your schedule? And then the final question is, can I meet, you know, my nutrient needs, my nutrition in a shorter eating window? That is really important, because if you're going to be working for 4 out of the 8 hours that you're doing the 16-8, it's going to be really difficult to get 2 or, you know, let alone 3 balanced meals in that time, which is what I recommend. Okay, so for me personally, just to give you a little personal insight, I tried 16-8 for a while. I felt okay, pretty decent. Then I started to notice my performance dipping, so I reduced it to 14-10. Again, very similar experience, struggling with, you know, energy. My goal is very much performance related, training for high rocks, training for marathons. So I reduced it again to 12-12, and that's where I hit the sweet spot. So with a bit of experimentation, I tend to eat my last meal of the day around 8 o'clock, giving myself 2 to 3 hours to rest and digest before going to bed. And then I won't eat my first meal of the day until about 8 or 9 o'clock, you know, the following morning. So that's the way that, you know, again, sorry for the coffee. That's the way I've established my routine. Bit of experimentation, which is exactly what I'd recommend you to do if you are considering trying this. Okay. Final little points that I want to mention here. Some of it is me repeating myself, so apologies for that, but I really want to hammer these points home. You need, you know, somewhat of an action plan. So these are a bit of a tongue twister, that. These are some steps you can take to get there. Number 1 is identifying your goals. I've already mentioned that. If you want the framework, be sure to drop a comment down below, or, you know, drop me a private DM over on Instagram, and I'll send it over to you. The exact framework that I use with my clients to help them set purposeful, meaningful goals that are conducive to success. So 1, identify your goals. 2, choose a realistic method for you. So again, that ties in with the identification of goals that are from the framework, realistic, relevant. You know, it's got to be applicable to you and your values and your lifestyle. Number 3, despite you know, this whole sort of concept being an eating pattern, you still need to prioritize nutrient quality in that eating window. Okay, so if you're still eating, you know, rubbish, it's not going to be any good to you, regardless of, you know, what people say or if the benefits are in fact backed by the science. Number 4, it's important to stay flexible. You know, you don't need to do this every day. Whilst I encourage keeping your eating patterns as similar as you can day to day to really allow your circadian rhythm to sort of tune into the way that you're, you know, ebbing and flowing through each day. It's important to stay flexible. If you do have a double training session one day or you are going out, you know, encourage that flexibility. That's what I'm, you know, always sort of saying to the people that I work with, and it's something that I try to adopt myself. And another one that you can sort of lean into is tracking how you feel. So to really make sure that it's working for you, keep a little food and mood journal. I know it sounds a little bit silly, but genuinely, if you're taking this seriously, just take some notes of how you feel each day off the back of the foods that you've eaten, the eating patterns and windows that you've adopted that day. You can do it on your phone. You can write it down. I prefer to write these things down. And then, you know, final one is ask for support. Don't go out and do this alone. I do encourage that experimentation because you don't truly know until you've tried it yourself. But look for guidance. You know, that's what people like myself are here for. I'm not saying, you know, you have to come to me, but that's what we're here for. You know, ask questions. Don't do it in the dark. I've done that plenty of times myself, and it's always best to ask. No such thing as a stupid question, but that is the video on intermittent fasting. I wanted to make it, you know, as concise and as quick as possible. I could talk on this topic for ages, but I'm very conscious of your time. We're already nearly like 17 minutes into this video, so I will wrap things up there. Hopefully you've taken something from this. I think the biggest takeaway is that you've got to find what works for you. Intermittent fasting is a tool. It's something that I've used previously. It's something that I don't use so much now. It's something that I'm not against reintroducing if the time is right. You've got to ask yourself those questions that I mentioned. So go back, make sure you rewatch this video, rewatch that section of the video specifically. Ask yourself those sorts of questions. If you want that goal setting framework, remember to drop me a message. I'll happily send it through to you. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about these sorts of strategies and the frameworks that I adopt to help people really find the best solutions for them, not just in their eating patterns, whether intermittent fasting is right for them, but also in the quality of their food, how they can align that with their training, with their sleep, with their stress management, all these areas, go to the description down below. There will be a link for full transparency to a funnel where you'll learn a little bit more about my services as a coach and what my program really entails. There'll be a few testimonials for people who have been through, you know, very similar situations to yourself. So you can go and check that out. No pressure to do so. I'm just letting you know that it's there. As I've already mentioned, I would really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button. Please like and comment if you found this video helpful or valuable in any way. It really does help me out. You know, I'm bringing free YouTube videos every single week on topics that you want to see. So hit that subscribe button. Plenty more coming soon. Hopefully you enjoyed once more. I thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. I've been waffling on for 18, nearly 19 minutes now. So I appreciate your time. You're an absolute legend. Thank you so much. And I'll see you in the next one in a bit.